Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, August 15th, 2025. Time to get going once again and head into the weekend. We're all on our own today. Greg Dworkin, of course, traditionally off on Fridays, and we launch into the crazy weekend. Donald Trump is traveling, but I guess his travel to his destination is over with, I would guess. I guess he went to, I don't know. I'm not certain what his travel plans are. But usually, while he's on the plane, he babbles uncontrollably to people, and there will be probably even more coverage going on, and perhaps some international coverage, because today is supposed to be the meeting with Vladimir Putin in the newly Russian territory of Alaska. You know, he might surrender Alaska or the rights to everything that might be in Alaska. Anyway, over to Putin during the weekend. He's already floating the rumors that he may open up rare earth minerals mining to the Russian interests there. And I don't know exactly how that plan works out, given that we were about to have to, we spent a couple of weeks insisting we're going to end up annexing Greenland because of the rare earth minerals there. And Trump sort of likes to obsess about that. And I guess now he's giving them away, but that's just, I guess, his version of trying to bribe Putin into settling the conflict in Ukraine. I don't think that that's going to do it. I think Putin likely would say, great, thanks for the rare earth, and I'm also continuing to try to grab Ukraine and conquer it, but whatever. Trump's a great deal maker in his mind, so I'm pretty sure that's what he's going for today. And he also continues to insist that it's long past time to award him the Nobel Peace Prize at this point, and I can't quite grasp what it is that obsesses him about it, except that I guess it comes with a gold medal, and a nominal amount of money, but international prestige. This is supposed to make him a serious person, I would guess. I don't know. And as a matter of fact, he's already confused about the role. This ought to be some kind of interesting meeting/summit. I think, again, I don't know if there's particular criteria that have to be met in order to declare something like this to be a summit. But whatever the criteria is, Donald Trump, there's no way he's going to meet it, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, Justice shares with me a bit of audio grabbed by Aaron Rupar. I guess, was that happening on, did he call in to a radio show or something? Trump on his way. So there we go. During flight to the, as they say on CNN for some reason, historic summit with Putin in Alaska, he's spending his time gabbing on CNN, calling into the show and saying things like, well, the quote is, I don't know, how long is this clip? Maybe I can float it on over to the big computer here in some fashion and play it for you, because it sounds like a bit of a slip of the tongue here from Trump, which is, par for the course. And I don't mean the golf course, although he might as well just be there. But, just scrambled brain nonsense that happens to him more often than others. And, of course, when it happened to Joe Biden, there was breathless coverage of it being clear sign of his mental deterioration. And this is just Trump being Trump, I guess. All right, let's see if it will actually load this. The link I got is to Twitter. How dare you, Justice, sending me a Twitter link when I'm sure we could find it on Blue Sky. But okay, whatever's convenient. How dare you, computer, take so long and take your time loading this thing? I don't know what's. I warmed it up just like always, but I guess I gotta get more hamster food to get more power to this computer here. All right, well, it's taking its sweet time loading, but the deal is he is, ahead of the meeting. I think he thinks he's being strategic, praising Putin, knowing that that would likely get back to him, and whatever. He thinks it's going to result in a Nobel Prize. And I guess while we're waiting for this thing to load, and it's taking its damn sweet time. We're just going to reload this thing. I saw a story yesterday on Blue Sky reported out of Norway that the Norwegian prime minister, I guess, was walking down the street as he had it and said he got a phone call on his cell phone from out of the blue, and it was Donald Trump calling him to lobby him for the Nobel Peace Prize nomination, the Prime Minister of Norway. Now, Norway, actually, I guess the Norwegian government is tied up in, as I read about it at some point. I think that the Norwegian Parliament nominates the nominating and judging committee for the Nobel Peace Prize. The Swedish government awards most of the scientific prizes, if not all of them. But the Peace Prize, I guess, is actually the Norwegian government. But their papers there, in rough translation, apparently, say that out of the blue, Trump called it was the Norwegian finance minister. So that's interesting, too. I can't seem to get this audio from Trump to load. It's just not happening. But anyway, out of the blue, Trump called the Norwegian finance minister to ask when he would get the Nobel Prize. Now, if you're wondering, what do you mean, when am I going to get the Nobel Prize? First of all, you haven't been nominated, but is your question, will I nominate you? And then how long does it take if I nominate you? If you win that year, when do you get the prize? Are you making plans? Don't. But why call the finance minister? The answer here is he calls the finance minister because he asks, one, when will I be getting the Nobel Peace Prize? And two, suggesting that he would impose tariffs, I guess, on Norway if he did not get it. So, it's a pretty common trick, I think, threatening the Norwegian government into giving you the Nobel, what was it again, prize? I'll have to check my notes on that one. Yeah, so that seems a little unusual, don't you think? All right, well, let me see if I can find. Now I'm really curious because of how annoyingly slow this thing is in getting this audio, and I'll just search around and see if I can't find Aaron Rupar's version of it on Blue Sky and see if we can play it that way. There we go. All right. Well, there's the post, and now I got to do the same stupid engineering thing of grabbing the link. This is just the way it is. And I in order to keep things nice and neat and clean on the big show computer, I try not to have the social media decks installed on this one so that things stay nice and clean and easy to run. And anyway, it just makes for more complications to try to do that. So, all right, I have to transfer the link over. Boy, this is some scintillating. All right, I probably shouldn't have gone this route. All right, but at least it's working now, and that means I can get rid of this pinwheel of death on the X version of it. And just another another object lesson in why Blue Sky over Twitter. And the answer is, remember that one time where it didn't work? Yeah. Well, apply that broadly. Okay, so here is Aaron Rupar's capture of Trump talking about Putin on his way to the quote-unquote historic summit in Alaska. Let's get that audio.
A little bit, Mr. President, because I know you've had a lot of phone calls with President Putin. What's the difference in a face-to-face, in-person meeting?
Okay, well, I think what's happening here, just to set this up again, now the audio reveals to me, I figured this was him calling into the show, but it's not. This is just audio-only press gaggle on Air Force One. I've usually seen video accompanying it, but they just didn't get any because it's television. All right, whatever, CNN.
Look, he's a smart guy. Been doing it for a long time, but so have I. Been doing it for a long time. And here we are, we're president.
We're president.
That was much more difficult than what I'm doing today, believe me.
I'm not certain what that even means. I mean, he's the president, and I guess Putin's the president of Russia, but all right, whatever. We're president. We're doing it and I don't know what that, it's harder than it was. All right, there's a little bit more here.
So we get along. There's a good respect level on both sides, and I think something's going to come of it. I noticed he's bringing a lot of business people from Russia, and that's good. I like that because they want to do business, but they're not doing business until we get the war settled.
Are you going to talk about this?
Okay, sure, whatever, man. Okay, so not too crazy there. I mean, one slip of the tongue. Although I do notice that the death rattle voice is back. He was very clear in his intonation the other day and moving very quickly and at a brisk pace. He had a very good day the other day when he was speaking at, I don't know, where was he? I don't remember exactly what he was talking about, but it was like 2-3 days ago, and it was like he got a fresh batch of Adderall or something, and he was still mixed up idiot, but his voice was clear. He didn't have the phlegmy rattle going on, and he was speaking quickly and at pace and sniffling again. So, somebody gave him the good stuff the other day when he was speaking. He had a little background thing behind him that was identifying what the event was that he was speaking at, but I'll be damned if I can remember that and distinguish that from any other of the stupid audio clips that we've got of this idiot. Anyway, off to Alaska. It's still America for now, to give away rights to important mining claims like the old time. These are claim jumpers. It's the old prospector. Vladimir Putin is going to. So he's on hand. By the way, excellent distraction from Jeffrey Epstein. And I don't know if I've said it yet today, but Jeffrey Epstein. Excellent way to distract from Jeffrey Epstein. Bring in the world leader infamously photographed during his campaign, lifting the shirt of a very young, like maybe 5-6-year-old boy and kissing him on the bare belly, as politicians do frequently. It's a great way to distract from the child molestation record wrapped up in the Jeffrey Epstein saga, which we're totally not paying any attention to anymore. All right. Other news, the D.C. siege continues, and I don't know. We don't have much to report from that except that all the video evidence is from the news people is that the law enforcement personnel that they've reassigned and the military personnel that they've deployed there are wasting their time, essentially walking around in circles, driving Humvees around in circles in front of Union Station, standing around in the blazing sun in heavy uniforms and face masks and all sorts of nonsense. Out in L.A., they've had a couple flare-ups of military-style police occupation, as well as Gavin Newsom held a press conference of some sort, no doubt addressing, he certainly did address the situation not only in D.C. but across the country, with Trump just, essentially tearing down the democratic system that we've had in place, on purpose for 250 years, and replacing it with his own fascist state. But as if to prove the point, heavily tactically uniformed LAPD officers, and maybe also I think also accompanied by federal law enforcement. It may not have been LAPD now that I think about it. I'm just going to try and review and see if I can. I'll have to leave notes to myself to find the stuff about the LA situation, but I think it actually that was the problem. Federal law enforcement officers, heavily armed, AR-15s, the whole works, the tactical gear, showed up outside the press conference for no particular reason, and I guess when asked what they were doing here, we're just here to make LA safe. Like, that's the normal way we do that, and we begin by making the part of LA outside of Gavin Newsom's press conference safe. Newsom used the opportunity, by the way, to make a very good point, and I wonder if I can find that. It's funny. A lot of these things that sort of occur to me along the way in the morning are things that I see the day before and say, that's interesting, and I take note of it on social media, but I don't necessarily think we're going to be spending time on it on the show. And so therefore I don't prepare. But Newsom was making an interesting point. He's been spending the last couple of days, or having his social media team, anyway, in the last couple of days, do a lot of very intentional trolling of Trump by, I guess, tweeting, because it is probably mostly on Twitter, tweeting in Trump's style. He's directed, I guess, they have on their own volition, I'm not certain which, his social media team to tweet in the Trump style, all caps, and say things like, "It's me, your favorite governor, Gavin Newsom, and we're very strongly doing something historically," the whole thing. It was really, it was funny, and it was also interesting that he was asked about it by the press there. What are you doing? Like, how come what's with this trolling stuff? Which, puts that's the label we use for it, but it puts a negative spin on what you're doing. How come you're doing all this trolling stuff? And he gave a great answer, which was basically, listen, I'm imitating the style of the current president of the United States. I mean, if you have a problem with the way I'm communicating, you would think that you would recognize what I was doing, and you might say, certainly if it's a problem for the governor of California to be communicating this way, then it's a hell of a problem for the president of the United States to be communicating this way. And to the extent that it has gotten your attention, I'm glad. But how come you're not asking the question, if you're disturbed by the fact that the governor of California would spend his time tweeting like this, but you can see it's being done for a reason, that it's a pointing up the absurdity of the president of the United States genuinely communicating like this, and why are you not, checking into that? And it was a damn good point, and I think even the person that shared it. Now, that's the way I can try and find it. The way that, or the person that shared it said, "I hate that he gets it," because Gavin Newsom is not a super popular figure in progressive circles, let's say, and it's sad that the only person that kind of knows how to score points against Trump sometimes is this same Gavin Newsom, who frustrates people by, all sorts of things on the policy front, in the fact that he hosted right-wing lunatic figures on his podcast, and there was really no reason for him to be doing podcasts at all, but whatever it was. So what was it? I'll see if I can find it. I hate that he gets, I think that was it, right? I hate that he gets it. So, but I guess that's not specific enough to bring up all right. Well, we're having no luck whatsoever with the social media searching in the middle of telling stories. So why don't we just get to the stories themselves, where the material is presented ahead of time in organized fashion. There are lots of options here, although now it also is beginning to look like Instapaper is not updating my list either. So I've got all sorts of tech problems here. No, it's interesting. Well, this is disturbing only because where I do actually take time and prepare stories ahead of time and make a list of them, I'm getting no cooperation from the list-keeping app. Well, luckily, there are a number of other stories that I had put aside that we didn't get to and that are now aging out, but we can share them. And Friday's as good a time as any for all of that. One of the smaller stories that I didn't get to, but you may have seen during the week, is covered by, let's see, this story here in the Washington Post, letting us know that there is another IRS commissioner in the works. Do we have somebody new here? IRS Commissioner Billy Long is out. And it should be noted for the record that Billy Long was, I believe, the second Trump administration's, is that right? The second Trump administration's sixth IRS commissioner? Not including, I don't think, the first administration, which is really rather amazing. And one of them, you may recall, lasted about 2 days. That was the guy that Elon Musk, while he was still at Dodgy, simply went ahead and nominated and filled or attempted to fill a vacancy at the IRS commissioner with his own hand-picked preferred candidate until Scott Bessent, if Justin Wolfers is right in his pronunciation, said, hey, actually, that's up to the Secretary of the Treasury, and that's me. Elon Musk is not the Secretary of anything. What is going on here? And they to their credit, they said, oh, yeah, that's right. He's not an official anything. All right, Mr. Bessent, Mr. Secretary, who would you like to have? And they replaced this other guy in 2 days. So here's the story, though, that introduces the subject. IRS, White House clashed over immigrants' data before tax chief was ousted. What precipitated the ouster? It was the White House and their immigrant hunters saying, we want all of the confidential tax data that you have on people that we think might be here illegally, which raises a number of questions. First, of course, is the privacy issue. Second of all, how did Billy Long, Trump's handpicked IRS commissioner, ever get in his head that there were privacy issues that he ought to actually stand up for in opposition to President Trump? Where did that come from? That's not insignificant. And of course, also the whole concept of, well, we got to throw all the illegal immigrants out of here because, of course, they don't pay their taxes. And that's making everybody mad. That's our populist argument against one of many populist arguments against immigration in general. They don't pay their fair share, except they do, and that's why the IRS has their information. But, if you're looking for logic, you're in the wrong country. IRS and White House clashed over immigrants' data before tax chief was ousted. The subheader says the Trump administration's move to push out IRS Commissioner Billy Long came after the agency said it couldn't release some information on taxpayers suspected of being here illegally. Oh, well, it was a nice try anyway. This is an August 9th piece, or at least that's when it was last updated. Jacob Bogage, I'm guessing at his pronunciation, we've had this problem before. Bogage, Bogage, and Katia Goba, both of whom are on the byline here. The Internal Revenue Service clashed with the White House over using tax data to help locate suspected undocumented immigrants hours before Trump administration officials forced IRS Commissioner Billy Long from his post on Friday. Not this Friday today, but last Friday, according to two people familiar with the situation. By the way, he lands on his feet, which, it's got to be a lot of stress on them. Billy Long's a large man, but you'll find out. I think they mention what's happening next in the article here. But the Department of Homeland Security sent the IRS a list on Thursday of 40,000 names of people that DHS officials thought were in the country illegally and asked the IRS to use confidential taxpayer data to verify their addresses, said the people who spoke on condition of anonymity, of course. And here they outright say why, for fear of reprisals. I hate when they come up with euphemisms. He's not authorized to speak on the record. That may be true, but what he's really worried about is reprisal. And you should just say so. All right. Interesting. I mean, I don't know why DHS was so keen on getting the information. Why not just continue grabbing anybody you think is brown enough off the street and deporting them? They have 40,000 very specific people in mind somehow. Anyway, the Treasury Department, which is the parent agency of IRS, and DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, agreed to an arrangement in April, because IRS wasn't busy in April, to facilitate such data sharing over the objections of the tax service's privacy lawyers. DHS officials have suggested they would eventually ask the IRS for help in locating 7 million people. Because, again, the IRS has nothing to do. There are about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, according to federal estimates. On Friday, though, the IRS responded that it was able to verify fewer than 3% of the names immigration enforcement officials submitted, the people said. The names the agency could match were mainly the individuals for whom DHS provided an individual taxpayer identification number. I'm sure that made it much easier to search through their computers and everything. But then at that point, again, you should be realizing, well, why does this person even have an individual taxpayer identification number? And the answer is they're paying taxes. So your excuse is no good. So you're down to just, well, they're paying taxes, but they're brown. So I'm just throwing them out for that. Anyway, an individual taxpayer number, individual taxpayer identification number, ITIN in tax parlance, is an IRS-specific identification that immigrants often use in place of a Social Security number on a tax filing. Undocumented immigrants pay tens of billions of dollars in taxes each year, which the ITINs help facilitate. So again, the complaint, they don't even pay their taxes. First of all, the guy who says that doesn't pay any taxes. Second of all, yes, they do, and they don't get any of the benefits of being a part of our society, but they pay because they're honest, hardworking people. White House officials, on the other hand, requested additional information on the taxpayers that the IRS identified. These people said specifically if any of them had claimed the Earned Income Tax Credit, which can reduce the tax bill for some low-income filers. The IRS declined to provide that information, citing taxpayer privacy rights. I don't know that they're not entitled to it if they're paying their taxes, but whatever. I guess that's the big deal now. Now we're going after people who, it's not that they are freeloaders and don't pay taxes, it's that they're doing too much sharp accountancy. We want to find out who's helping these people file their taxes such that instead of paying a nominal rate of 33%, they're paying 31% by claiming an earned income tax credit. That's the major crime. That and, of course, throwing sandwiches. Well, they've got the law enforcement boys busy there. We'll get to the firing of the IRS commissioner after this.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Coast, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Still tracking down a couple of things. I found some of what I was looking for on Blue Sky earlier, but now I think mostly moot point, and so we'll keep the video on mute because of the mootness of the point that's now muted. But I found the Gavin Newsom video, so I'll share that with Scott so that he can share it with you. And let's make sure we get it into the roundup today. Scott! Okay, just so I have your attention, Scott, you know that's coming. I don't need to get your attention, of course. All I have to do is email it to you, and then the summary shows up. It's fantastic the way this works. All right, well, let's see. We were in the middle of telling you about the IRS commissioner getting fired, and then we're going to get to the, by the way, he's like the 500th IRS commissioner. But let's see. This was, again, I guess due to administration fears that tax-paying immigrants who they believe to be here illegally aren't paying enough taxes, you know, like SpaceX or Donald Trump, for instance, except browner. And that's hard to do, you know. I guess orange is not really a shade of brown, but you get the idea. Anyway, the names that the agency could match were mainly the individuals for whom DHS provided their ITINs, right? So it wasn't a question of they're not really paying their taxes or else it wouldn't have come up correctly in the computers. It was actually easy to identify the people who are, you know, following the rules to the best that they of their ability and paying taxes on their income while they're here. The White House wanted to know if any of them had claimed the earned income tax credit, because I guess they hate that because it's targeted at working people. Billy Long, the IRS commissioner, had previously told agency executives that his agency would not furnish confidential taxpayer information outside of the confines of the IRS's agreement with DHS, the people said, and I guess this exceeded the confines of that agreement. Still, the people did not know if tension over the IRS's role in President Donald Trump's mass deportation drive contributed to Long's departure from the IRS. I mean, duh. But, the people also did not know if Donald Trump appeared in the Epstein files, but duh, he does. They didn't know whether he fired Billy Long for no apparent reason in the middle of the week because all of a sudden he wouldn't comply with his demands for information. We were not sure that was the reason. It could be just he hallucinated something about Billy Long. That's certainly possible, but I think we can all draw this conclusion. Just as, we're not sure, the people familiar with the thing said, that Donald Trump authorized the transfer of Ghislaine Maxwell from federal prison to minimum security prison camp, along with work release privileges, despite the fact that she was sentenced to 20 plus years for serious sex trafficking crimes and would otherwise not be eligible either for transfer to this other prison or work release. But that's the conclusion we're forced to draw since there's no other possible explanation. All right. Anyway, on the IRS, the Trump administration is working in lockstep to eliminate information silos and prevent illegal aliens from taking advantage of benefits meant for hardworking American taxpayers. White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson said in a statement. She's also increasingly awful. They're all really establishing themselves as horrible people, the White House spokesperson crew. But again, right, we want to prevent illegal aliens from taking advantage of benefits meant for hardworking American taxpayers. Now, they're not Americans, but they are hardworking taxpayers, and that's the issue. And also, we mean hardworking American white taxpayers. Any absurd assertion other than everyone being aligned on the mission is simply false and totally fake news, she added after this story was published. DHS said in a statement that the agreement with the IRS outlines a process to ensure that sensitive taxpayer information is protected while allowing law enforcement to effectively pursue criminal violations. It's contradictory, but there you have it. The confidential information is protected from anyone else getting it, but law enforcement officers get to have it. That would be a legitimate claim in any other administration. But in this one, also we posted it on Signal. Sure. Anyway, after here's the garbage statement from the agency. Blah, blah, blah. Joe Biden, open borders. They are now, all they're saying is we're putting the books in order is what they're trying to claim. Anyway, Treasury Department officials themselves didn't actually return a request for comment on this thing. Long, last Friday, said Trump intended, ready for this, to nominate him as the U.S. ambassador to Iceland. For some reason, after less than 2 months on the IRS job, which is super normal and everything like that, and is not at all related to this conflict. Like, I think you can pretty much conclude that the reason you only stayed on this job for 2 months, it wasn't like they were waiting for Iceland to open up or anything. Oh, Billy Long, I want two things, sir. If I can't have Iceland, give me the IRS, and I'll cool my heels there while I wait for Iceland to open up. Sure. All right. Anyway, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, will serve as interim IRS commissioner. Once again, Trump knows nobody else. Nobody's vetted anybody. Nobody did any of the work. I got mad. I fired somebody. There isn't anybody ready to replace them. We don't really care whether there's an administrator there anyway, because we don't want to do anything. We just want to target people and wreck their lives. Bessent, whatever his name is, you take over. Long jokingly posted on social media on Friday that he'd called Trump and asked to join ICE, but I guess he thought I said Iceland, Long wrote. Oh well, haha. CNN reported last Friday that about the DHS request for information, and that the White House was displeased with the number of records the IRS shared. Long had previously sparred with Treasury officials over plans to start tax filing season around President's Day in February, about a month behind schedule, actually, and also preemptively announced plans to eliminate the IRS's direct file program, even though Treasury officials had not decided to do so, according to 4 people familiar with the events who similarly spoke on condition of anonymity. Although I think eventually Treasury officials did come around to saying, oh, there's an easy way for regular people to file their taxes without paying expensive accountants. Get rid of it. Billy Long jumped the gun, though. Billy Long, it says here, this is a quote, did a great job while at the IRS, and his promotion to ambassador was previously slated to happen. A White House official said on Saturday, speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss personnel matters, but also to lie because, come on, he's been IRS commissioner for 2 months. How much in advance could this promotion have been previously slated? Any amount of time prior to Friday that you were thinking of making him ambassador to Iceland can only be a slice of the 2 months that he's been IRS commissioner, right? This really can't have been in the works for very long without that being an admission that he was never supposed to be IRS commissioner in the first place. Long, a former 6-term Republican congressman from Missouri, so once again, everything Trump touches dies. He's still working. I'm sure he thinks that these are promotions. They told him as much, but he's had a political career destroyed. Move him from Congress to the IRS, give him 2 months at the IRS, and then ship him off to Iceland. All right. Former 6-term Republican congressman from Missouri. He was confirmed to the position in mid-June, so he hasn't even had a cool month in his service there. It's just the summer. It's like a camp, right? So you go to IRS commissioner camp for the summer. Mom, I want to go to science camp. Well, it's all booked up. Sorry, you should have told me earlier. So we'll send you to IRS commissioner camp instead. Trump broke tradition by not allowing the former Biden-appointed IRS commissioner, Danny Werfel, to serve out his full 5-year term. So although everybody serves at the pleasure of the president, just to give you some idea of what's going on here, normally when you are installed, you get a 5-year term. Long got 2 months, but I'm sure the promotion to ambassador was pre-planned before then. Right, sure. And by the way, speaking of these 5-year terms, Billy Long was the 6th IRS leader since the start of the year. So I guess that includes what's his name from the Biden administration, Werfel. So not all 6 prior IRS commissioners this year are creditable to Donald Trump. One of them belongs to Joe Biden. But there you have it. Billy Long, the 6th IRS leader since the start of this year, and it is only just mid-August. One early acting commissioner, what kind? Acting! Right. Left amid churn at the agency due to the administration's cost-cutting campaign led by Elon Musk's U.S. Dodgy service, while another left the agency after the agency agreed to the DHS data sharing arrangement. So that's some legacy this data sharing arrangement has. Billy Long is booted out for not producing enough information under the agreement, but he was saying, I'm restricted and I'm going to only provide the information that's covered by this agreement, which makes it sound like he thinks the agreement is legit. It's the interpretation of the agreement that we have a problem with. But the prior IRS commissioner actually got booted out because he said, no, the agreement sucks. We should not sign it. He was a Trump person and still said no. And so they got rid of him and replaced him with Long, who was supposed to be more pliant. And then even Long wouldn't go along with it. It's just interesting what's between the lines here. A third acting commissioner, which kind? Acting! Was pushed out after only 2 days. This is the one we were talking about before, because of an internal conflict. That's all they say, between Musk and Besant. I really got to figure out how he pronounces his name. I'm not certain whether I trust Justin Wolfers on this one. Not because I think he's wrong, but because I think he's Australian. We don't know how they're going to pronounce these things in Australia. It's upside down and backwards. The toilet goes the other direction. How can he possibly know? It's a very intriguing accent, and everyone loves listening to it here in the United States, but we don't know if he's got it right. Anyway, yeah, the internal conflict between Musk and Besant, damn it, was that Musk just was like, I nominated the IRS commissioner. Because why not? I do whatever I want, including working in the old executive office building high on ketamine and installing video gaming systems and destroying USAID and killing millions of people around the world. And nobody seems to mind, so why don't I just name the IRS commissioner? That's a cop-out in terms of describing it, but I guess they hit their word limit there. And, of course, if they hadn't, then we'd be on this same story all day long, and we're not supposed to be doing that. Can I possibly persuade Instapaper to show me the I think 5, 10, 15 other things that I thought I put in there? I really have to investigate what's going on in some of these stories that are not showing up in the feed anymore. All I've got, I'm fairly certain I put like, well, maybe I should look at my browser history instead, because I'm really upset. I check each night to make sure, haven't I parked these things in Instapaper before I close the tab? And then I verify that they're there and close the tab, and then the next morning I go and they're not in there. So now I'm afraid I'm losing my mind. Now, at this point, I'm only just coming to that realization. All right, like I said, there's some other things I wanted to share with you. One of them is something I only saw in passing yesterday, but an Axios story, which I guess we will now add to the Justin Wolfers. This is the Justin Wolfers show today. Increasingly the case. He's doing a beautiful job encapsulating the problems with the economic problems with this administration. But as he was listing off the strange similarities that the United States economy now has with centralized command economies like those you might find in China or the old Soviet Union, where the leader of the country dictates to ostensibly private operations what they're going to do, what kind of products will you make, how will you make them, where will you make them, at what rate will you charge for them, etc., etc. Now another thing to add to I'll take ownership of the golden share of Nippon Steel, et cetera, et cetera. He's been leaning on Intel, and that was one of the things that Wolfers listed, was telling Intel who its CEO should be. And in addition to that, Axios now reports under this headline, Trump administration in talks, and maybe they're just talking to themselves, in talks to take Intel stake, reports say. Jeffrey Kane reporting for Axios, and I may have to read the Instapaper version of this. Although, look there, that's one that I parked there yesterday that, is now no longer there. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. I wonder if I park things in Instapaper that are paywalled, does Instapaper like purge them overnight or something? But let's see if I can't, get it to refresh. Here we go. Downloading. We'll see whether it downloads all the other things that I was missing for the day. But now, once again, the administration alleging through I don't know who that Intel is going to give some ownership stake in the company to who, what, something, the United States. And once again, I have bad news for you about what Donald Trump thinks of when he thinks you're giving something to the United States. Very frequently, he thinks it means him personally. So, all right, let's see how we can read this description here. The U.S. government has been holding discussions, I don't know whether any people from Intel are in these discussions, on taking an equity stake in the chip maker Intel. Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday. And you know their format, why it matters. It's really, should go without saying, but okay. A deal would be another turn by the Trump administration away from laissez-faire policies and toward state capitalism. Well, they are stating it correctly. And it seeks to bolster the domestic fabrication of semiconductors. That's the excuse behind these steps toward state capitalism. But I don't know whether boosting domestic fabrication of semiconductors is really on their radar or not. Intel, the big picture, it says, is Intel's planned $20 billion semiconductor plant in Ohio has been repeatedly delayed, and a major government investment could provide a needed boost, Bloomberg noted. Taking a stake would echo previous moves by the administration. They're just weird and dumb moves. A couple of bullet points here. The U.S. government took a golden share, apparently, to allow Nippon Steel to acquire U.S. Steel. And the Department of Defense is buying $400 million in preferred shares in MP Materials, a miner of rare earth minerals, which, of course, are all now being given away to Russia as we speak. Zoom out on this story. The reports of talks come just days after Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan met with President Trump, Treasury Secretary Scott, whatever his name is, and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick at the White House. Last week, Trump called for Tan to resign, citing what he said were ties to China. Why did he say he had ties to China? Because 5 minutes prior to his saying that, he had seen Tom Cotton on TV, I don't know whether he was on Fox or what, saying that he thought that the Intel CEO had ties to China. I mean, he's Asian. I can see that. But other than that, I don't know. Is he right? I don't know. It doesn't matter because Tom Cotton said it on Fox and now the president thinks it's true. And he's a policy-making kind of guy, apparently. This is the power we give him under the Constitution, and some of which we don't actually give him under the Constitution, in which we specifically withhold from him under the Constitution. But the point is, I've said the word Constitution. And now you're all supposed to be confused and think that what is happening here is going to sail over your head, and only the smart lawyers involved in the United States government could possibly understand such things. And they say it means the president can take personal ownership of the entirety of Intel and Microsoft if he wants to. That is interesting, isn't it? Anyway, other countries have stakes in companies that they consider to be of national importance. I know that I guess they're trying to normalize this, but of course, those states practice state capitalism and ours does not, and is ostensibly been dedicated to the proposition that we never should for the past 50 plus years, if not longer. So, whatever. But yeah, other countries do this. The biggest shareholders in Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing, for example, is Taiwan's Sovereign Wealth Fund, which has a 6.4% stake. By the way, other countries behead you for not being Muslim. So why don't we do that? Well, because we're a different system. And in fact, the whole American exceptionalism thing is supposed to be that we're not that system, allegedly. But if Democrats wanted to try something like that, that would be socialisms, and we'd have to have a revolution in this country. Remember, giving people the opportunity to pool their resources and buy health insurance from the private market for less is unforgivable communism. I think. That's what I was told back then. Anyway, by the numbers, what do they say by the numbers of the shares of Intel? Well, they surged after the initial Bloomberg report. Everybody wants to be a shareholder with the U.S. government in partnership, right? The stock rose more than 7% in regular trading and gained another 3% in after-hours trading. The surge added more than $7 billion to the company's market capitalization. That sounds interesting and all, but that's probably based on the old understanding that those shares in Intel would be purchased, and that they'd have to be purchased probably from current shareholders, and probably people were starting to count the money that they thought they were going to get when the government came around to pay them for their Intel shares, as opposed to coming into their house, pushing them to the ground and taking the shares and saying, these belong to us now. And, well, what can I tell you? You're in the wrong position on these shares. I don't think it's going to work out for you. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting addition to the nonsense that Trump's been racking up that we were talking about, all the new attributes of a totally different approach to the United States economy that somehow the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan is endorsing. They're just, what can I tell you? They're not very consistent people. All right. Let's see. I found the story of Trump calling the Norwegian finance minister. I found the Gavin Newsom audio that I can share with you as well. There was also this New York Times article, which I guess maybe we'll just give you the headlines in the first couple of paragraphs about this. Is their coverage of, and I guess we should be using Washington Post coverage for this, of the troops in Washington. But just to give you the headline from New York Times, troops in Washington remain largely unseen so far. There have been some very specific incidents that have been captured on video and gone viral, so to speak, including the eventual arrest of sandwich throwing guy, who, by the way, turns out to have been a DOJ attorney, now fired, I think, rather obviously, but who actually, stood up and said, "It was me. It was an act of protest. I'm not hiding from it." Not only did they catch him on the street, but I guess they released him at that point, then charged him, or attempted to charge him, with further crimes. And they made a big show of going to his apartment in a very nice neighborhood where this was totally unnecessary, and sending 20 plus SWAT guys to make the big collar of the guy who threw a sandwich at them in a collared shirt, a button-down Oxford shirt. Anyway, that was totally unnecessary, but they wanted to put out the video, and I guess that made them feel really super cool. And anyway, troops, for most people, I guess, largely unseen. It's we get these snippets on video, but I guess daily life inside Washington, D.C. is more or less unchanged. Federal agent, or at least according to the New York Times, which maybe it's just in their interest to say that that's the case. I really don't know with these guys anymore. Federal agents are assisting local police, but a surge in National Guard troops hasn't hit the streets. Okay. They're just driving around in circles in front of Union Station, apparently. President Trump promised an overwhelming presence of federal agents and military troops on the streets of Washington when announcing a crime crackdown earlier this week. 4 days in, however, National Guard soldiers have mostly been seen massing in parking lots and taking photos with tourists. Federal agents have made a larger show of force, mainly through traffic checkpoints and immigration-related arrests. And apparently the White House Twitter feed is turned into, as somebody says, turned into the Breitbart black crime vertical, as they are sharing pictures of all the black and brown people that they have arrested during this crackdown and telling everybody what their alleged crimes are. Speaking, though, of sandwich guy and alleged crimes, I did also see, and I'll see if I can't dig up the Blue Sky link to it, but apparently they have Jeanine Pirro, in her first week or so on the job as U.S. attorney, has been demonstrating her prowess in being unable to get an indictment against any of the people, well, not any of the people, but it's at least some of the people that they've been charging with violations during this crackdown. And I think it's related to Sandwich Guy in this way. Here's the post that I saw from Jordan Fisher. Can I get the bio on Jordan Fisher? Investigative reporter at WUSA in Washington, D.C. That's the local ABC News affiliate. Breaking, it's now broken. Federal prosecutors said yesterday, that they went to a grand jury twice to indict a D.C. woman for assaulting an FBI agent during an arrest by ICE, and were twice rejected. Well, you know the old saying, right? Prosecutors, it's easy, right? Almost never do grand juries deny prosecutors. A prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich. It's an actual, I'm not just talking about the sandwich thrower guy. That's an old saying. You could indict a ham sandwich. In other words, it's just the nature of the system is such that prosecutors are the only ones doing the talking. And it's easy to get most grand juries, when you have an organized case, to believe there's probable cause for going forward with a case. It isn't until the trial stage at which it has to be proven, beyond a reasonable doubt. But no indication of their ability to get an indictment in this case. And it says here also in Jordan's post, notably this woman who was twice not indicted, or no bill of indictment handed up. It's usually handed up, not handed down. And they say here, when you manage to get past this stage, they say it's a no bill of indictment. Right. So she won the Nobel Prize yesterday by managing to avoid indictment twice. And notably, she faces the same charge as the district's alleged sandwich thrower, who they sent the SWAT team after at his apartment building. So it doesn't bode well for Jeanine Pirro. She's going to be hitting the boxed wine extra hard, I guess, this weekend, because just abject failure in getting these people charged, which is as it should be. And I have also seen other people say, this ought to be the way D.C. juries handle these things. Stop indicting people. Just refuse to indict people arrested in this crackdown. And, see what happens from there. But I, of course, it's entirely possible that this administration will just say, well, we don't need indictments. Those things are stupid anyway. We're just going to charge people anyway, or put them on a plane and send them to Guantanamo. And what are you going to do about it? I don't want to provoke that, but I suppose you should prepare for that possibility. It's totally illegal and unconstitutional and everything else. But, why should that bother anybody? Anyway, I found that very interesting, and I guess worth keeping an eye on. And I also have this. It was Seth Kotler who pointed out that the White House's official X account has now been turned into the Breitbart Black Crime vertical. Do you all remember that was the case? They used to have a whole vertical on their site just featuring crimes committed by black people because they're racist, and that was what they wanted to gin up excitement and anger about. And well, now it's official policy at the White House. So these things have repercussions. All right, let me take a minute to regroup here, drink the rest of the cold tea that's sitting here waiting for me, and prepare for part 2 if we divide it into 2 parts rather than 4, which is what we're actually dividing into. It's part 3 if you think about it that way instead. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, part 3, part 2, depending on how many pieces you divide this whole thing into. Whatever. It's the second hour and part 3 of the show, therefore. All right. By the way, Justice had supplied me in the background, and I've just now unearthed it here. The example, or at least one example, of Governor Gavin Newsom's press office tweeting in the Trump style here. Screen cap provided by John Cooper, who sends this one on from, again, Gov Press Office is the address here. Governor Newsom Press Office. It's all caps, as you can imagine, just to give you a flavor of it. Donald is finished. He is no longer hot. First, the hands so tiny. And now me, Gavin C. Newsom, have taken away his step. I don't even understand this, but many are saying he can't even do the big stairs on Air Force One anymore. Uses the little baby stairs now. That's true, actually. Sad. Tomorrow, he's got his, quote, meeting with Putin in, quote, Russia. Nobody cares. All the television cameras are on me, America's favorite governor. I mean, this is funny. Even low ratings Laura Ingraham, parentheses, edits the tapes. Can't stop talking about my beautiful maps. You're welcome for Liberation Day, America. Donnie J missed, quote, the deadline. Whoops. And now I run the show. Thank you for your attention to this matter, GCN. It's very funny. And they're doing good work with it. And I don't know. I said it wouldn't be necessary, I think, to play the audio. But now that I've gone back to the subject of Gavin Newsom, maybe you want to hear his explanation of why he's doing this stuff in the fashion that he is. And I don't know. Let's see if it doesn't take too long, we can jump over into email and load it up. But, he speaks to about 40 seconds worth, I think. And you might as well hear it in his voice. I gave you, I think, a pretty decent encapsulation of what it is that he said. But this is, again, from Denny Carter's post, in which he says, and I'll provide you with Denny Carter's version of it too, because you see his comment. I hate how much he gets it, right? And Denny Carter is retweeting from Fact Post News and their account at Blue Sky. And the question he's being asked is, what's going on with these posts that are clearly trolling Trump? And maybe you can hear the question being asked in this piece. About 45 seconds of tape. Wow, it's very loud. So maybe I'll lower the levels a little bit here. A lot of background noise in an echoing chamber here, the hallway of a government building in California.
Can you react to what's going on with those posts on X that are clearly trolling the president?
What?
Can you just talk about that? Is that like a strategy?
I don't know. I hope it's a wake-up call to the President of the United States. I'm sort of following his example. If you've got issues with what I'm putting out, you sure as hell should have concerns about what he's putting out as president.
Yeah.
So to the extent it's gotten some attention, I'm pleased. But I think the deeper question is, how have we allowed the normalization of his tweets through social posts over the course of the last many years to go without similar scrutiny and notice?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point and well put, and it's off the cuff. So, that's good too. It'd be nice to have somebody in charge who could think on his feet and actually do this stuff. And most of the people I'm watching on social media reacting to this are not saying, well, he should be president. They're actually very hesitant to see him to see him as president or even as the leading candidate. And I've actually seen a couple of people just explicitly say, I'd like to promote this activity not in the hopes of boosting Gavin Newsom to frontrunner status for 2028, much less electing him president, but in the hopes that other people who I appreciate more for policy reasons and personality reasons, perhaps, will likewise adopt similar tactics. I think it's a good one, and people should be doing it. I do. And maybe it's best, though, if it's somebody that we don't want to actually be president, because then if he isn't president, then they can't hold it against him later on. Anyway, it's just very interesting, and I thought a very good tactic, and I appreciate it. And what can I tell you? Maybe I'm not a strategist, but it strikes a chord with me. All right. Other stories I need to catch up with. There are many. Even though Instapaper isn't updating, and I got to look into exactly why. And I wonder if there's any capacity that I hit, or I don't know, some disconnect somewhere. But there's other stories that are definitely in there that you definitely need to know about. One of them I hinted at the other day, and I only had a few minutes at the end of the show, and I just wanted to get it on the record. Now I will tell you the rest of the story here because it's important, and then we'll perhaps it has to do with the courts, and perhaps we'll stay on the courts for a story or two. I should probably be poking around to see what Steve Vladeck is up to lately, too, because I've missed out. I haven't seen him in the flood of other news stories. But this one from CNN on August 8th, Justice Department opens investigation, and it should really be in scare quotes, but it's not, into New York Attorney General who won civil fraud case against Trump. I think I mentioned this maybe on Monday. But Kara Scannell, Casey Gannon, Jeremy Herb, unless he pronounces it like herbs, like the plants, got the byline on this one. Here's the story. The Justice Department, allegedly, I mean, they did do this thing. I'm saying the alleged Justice Department, I guess. The people occupying the offices in Washington, D.C., formerly known as the Justice Department, has subpoenaed New York Attorney General Letitia James's office as a part of a criminal investigation into President Donald Trump's longtime adversary, according to multiple sources, in the latest example of the Trump administration taking on the president's perceived enemies. And it's important to say perceived enemies here, even though they just said Trump's longtime adversary. Well, she's Trump's longtime adversary in the sense that she's the Attorney General of New York, and Donald Trump keeps committing crimes in New York and elsewhere. But I mean, like Batman and the Penguin are longtime adversaries, but it's not because Batman dislikes the Penguin's personality type. it's because he keeps committing crimes in Gotham. I don't know. But anyway, it's a small point perhaps, but, framing is an issue. Anyway, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of New York. Remember, I mentioned this on the way out, and then I was like, damn, what's that guy's name again? And it's Sarconi, and I couldn't make out how to pronounce it, whether it was with the E sound on the end or not. And then we found the AI reading, computerized reading of an article that mentioned him. And we didn't know what to make of it because we were more caught up in the fact that he is John Sarcone III and that they called him John Sarcone III. Right. Anyway. But this is worth pointing out, and it's not really pointed out, I don't think, in this article. But because we gave you the background on the weird maneuver that they were using in the Northern District of New York and in New Jersey to renominate the interim U.S. attorneys as acting U.S. attorneys, or was it? I forgot the acting button, or I can't remember whether it was that or the other way around. But that both Sarcone and Alina Habba pulled the same maneuver. We saw it happen with Sarcone and said, now they're running stories that say Alina Habba's appointment is ending too. And everybody's celebrating her departure, and she's even preparing for departure. Although, can't we see that if they can make this work for Sarcone, they can make this work for her? And, day later, they in fact did. Anyway, the point I wanted to get around to here is, so here they are, quote unquote, or opening and quote unquote investigation. They are definitely opening it, I guess. It's no question about that. It's whether it's a real investigation or not is what's open to interpretation. But you should note for the record that not only is it a ridiculous notion to be investigating Letitia James, but that the person who's going to be in charge of heading up the investigation is the guy who they just had to pull the special maneuver for to keep him on as, acting U.S. attorney for the Northern District of New York. So as a thank you for doing this dumb, weird maneuver to keep me on, I will do your bidding and open an, quote, investigation into Letitia James. What is the quid pro quo in New Jersey going to be? I don't know, but I assume it's something along the lines of opening an investigation into the Democratic governor there, because, who else is it going to be? Just give me a prominent Democrat and I'll investigate them. So again, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of New York, and they don't bother telling you who that is, issued 2 subpoenas seeking information about James's investigations into the Trump Organization and the National Rifle Association, the sources said. A grand jury investigation into James has also convened in Albany, New York, according to a source familiar. The grand jury probe into James is said to be looking into deprivation of rights, which means violating someone's constitutional rights against Trump. That's a very awkwardly written sentence, but let's see. It's the grand jury probe. It's okay. Said to be, they're alleging that she violated Trump's civil rights by charging him and convicting him of civil fraud. Right? I mean, how it's a deprivation of rights to go to the grand jury and ask them whether there's probable cause to hand up an indictment, and they say yes, and then you go to trial, and in fact, not only do you indict the person and go to trial, but you get 34 convictions. Well, that's a violation of his civil rights. I guess in the world where, January 6th was a day of love and everybody gets pardoned and can now work in the Justice Department, drumming out and arresting the people who actually enforced the law that day, this makes a certain amount of sense. Wow. So the Justice Department declined comment on all of this, and Abbe Lowell, as it turns out, is the attorney for Letitia James. So good choice there. And Abbe said, investigating the fraud case Attorney General James won against President Trump and his businesses has to be the most blatant and desperate example of this administration's carrying out the president's political retribution campaign. And I think he's right. Lowell added, weaponizing the Department of Justice to try to punish an elected official for doing her job is an attack on the rule of law and a dangerous escalation by this administration. If prosecutors carry out this improper tactic, and it is that, and are genuinely interested in the truth, well, we are ready and waiting with the facts and the law, to the extent any of that stuff still matters, I guess. So anyway, very interesting. And will Abbe Lowell get a call from Donald Trump and or Jared Kushner and try to warn him off the case, or are they just smart enough to know that they can't really do that? Or would Jared bother involving himself in anything anymore? But remember that Abbe Lowell represented, I think it was, right? Abbe Lowell represented Kushner in God only knows what the case was, but I can't bring it to mind. And let's go research it real quick and see if we can't add something here. Let's see. As a New York Times, let's see. First of all, Lowell has in fact represented both Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump in inquiries linked to Russia. Just putting that out there. And that's from Wikipedia. And there's a New York Times article from February of 2023, and the title is Abbe Lowell Built Ties to Trump World. Now he's one of Hunter Biden's lawyers. So he's kind of everywhere, to be sure. And I mean, he's a legit high power defense attorney who takes on all comers, and you can't really criticize him necessarily for taking some of these high profile, highly paid cases. But that won't stop anybody from criticizing him for it anyway, naturally. But where were we with this? Now I've lost where we had the article that we had open here. Am I in Instapaper? There we are. No, that isn't it either. Oh, this is the CNN piece, right. So anyway, Lowell is ready to defend Letitia James in this. CNN had asked the White House for comment on the investigation, I guess, and got none. James is among a long list of Trump's perceived political enemies who are now facing scrutiny from his administration, which is, about the least helpful expression of what's going on here. Facing scrutiny, yes, but they make it sound that way. But, normally, I mean, every once in a while, people face scrutiny from a presidential administration, but because they've done something legitimately illegal that needs investigating. And, they're sort of skirting around the fact that this is just an angry guy's enemies list that he thinks he can pursue investigations against because he controls the levers at the DOJ, and there's nobody willing to say, as even Billy Long did at the IRS, this is wrong and we're not really supposed to be doing this. That doesn't exist at DOJ. And to the extent that it ever did, those people have been purged and are now themselves being charged with crimes. All right. Well, they just put it in that very milquetoast way. A long list of perceived political enemies now facing scrutiny from his administration. The Justice Department has opened investigations into former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan, the Obama administration's handling of Russia's 2016 election interference, former DHS official and anonymous author Miles Taylor, and former CISA head Chris Krebs, who was fired for saying that the 2020 election was not rigged. The Office of Special Counsel earlier this month launched a Hatch Act investigation into former Special Counsel Jack Smith, who indicted Trump twice in 2023. This all, kind of a piece with the other actions that basically stand for the proposition that it is now illegal for courts to find against President Trump and illegal for people to ask courts to find against President Trump. In May, FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that there was an investigation into James based in the Eastern District of Virginia, the Rocket Docket, EDVA down here, over whether she committed fraud on a mortgage application, really stretching to look for something to charge her with. Lowell said that probe is focused on baseless and long discredited allegations. What about this Trump civil fraud case? You all remember it. 34 counts on which he was found guilty. In September of 2022, the New York Attorney General's office filed a sweeping civil lawsuit against Trump, his adult sons, and the Trump Organization, alleging that they inflated the value of its properties to mislead lenders and insurers. And he did. He's been convicted of it. A judge found Trump liable for fraud and ordered him to pay more than $450 million. Trump has appealed to have the judgment thrown out, which is still pending. And Trump posted a $175 million bond while he appealed. And everybody remembers that he effed up the paperwork for that bond too, right? Trump and paperwork, man. I'm telling you. Trump's hostility with James was evident during the 11-week trial. Oh, you know what? I'm pausing here just for a second to make notes here for myself. I was saying Trump and paperwork, man. There was something just the other day. Kari Lake apparently making some moves. Remember her? Making some moves in the job she allegedly holds in the administration. They put her in charge of the old Voice of America networks, and I forget what the entity is called now that she's supposedly in charge of it, but making some, I think, legal maneuvers and alleging in the documents along with it that, she holds this office, but apparently she does not. And there was no paperwork. Somebody actually said, show me the papers that say that Kari Lake actually holds the position she alleges herself to hold. As we're worried about standing in lawsuits, as we mentioned yesterday, right? There's a serious question here on the table. Is Kari Lake the administrator of this entity and therefore has standing to bring these either lawsuits or investigations or whatever? And apparently, golly, the paperwork was apparently never filed in any serious way appointing her to this position. And I'll bet you can find that in 50 other positions across the administration. Let's see if I can find that news for you elsewhere as I make notes. I'll continue on here with this CNN piece reminding us that Trump allegedly posted a $175 million bond during his appeal. Trump's hostility with James was evident during the 11-week trial, which took place in 2023 and 2024, ahead of his New York criminal trial. Trump railed against James from the witness stand and in the hallways of the courtroom. This is a political witch hunt, and I think she should be ashamed of herself, Trump said of James during a day's worth of combative testimony. And am I now confusing the 34 counts in my head as between the criminal trial and the civil trial? I can't remember now offhand because he's just involved in so much criminal wrongdoing and civil fraud that it's hard to remember off the top of my head. But I'm not going to pause to double check it at the moment. We'll see whether the story clears things up. You believe this political hack back there, meaning Letitia James, and that's unfortunate, he said in reference to James, who frequently attended the trial sitting behind her attorneys. James countered by making her own statement outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan and through social media videos. Included on Trump's defense team in the civil fraud case was Alina Habba, now acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey and one of several personal Trump attorneys who were appointed to positions in his Justice Department. Just pausing here for a second. If at this point they don't mention Sarcone, then I don't know what we're doing here in this country. And it is Sarcone, isn't it? Do I have the name right? Yeah, John Sarcone, III. To call out the Alina Habba connection and not mention that, by the way, the U.S. attorney, in fact, the acting U.S. attorney for the above-mentioned Northern District of New York, is also an acting U.S. attorney by virtue of the same barely legal maneuvering that we used to install Alina Habba. But we're going to talk about Alina Habba. I guess because she was on the defense team here and Sarcone wasn't, but I don't know. It seems like, if you're going to start carving out time to mention Alina Habba's role in this, you might want to mention, Sarcone is supposed to be is not supposed to be so beholden to Trump personally. because otherwise this creates, obvious conflicts of interest. Anyway, back to Abbe. Abbe also frequently criticized New York Attorney General during the trial. In her closing statement, Abbe went after James personally, saying, "I looked back and saw her shoes were off this morning, and she had a Starbucks coffee." I don't know what that's supposed to mean to the court, but that's what she said. The judge stopped her, responding that closing arguments had to stick to the facts of the case, which, yeah, that's kind of basic. That's law school stuff. Anyway, what about the NRA and all of this? The Attorney General's office also took the National Rifle Association to court and won judgments forcing the organization to reform its structure. James filed a lawsuit in 2020 to dissolve the NRA over allegations the organization violated laws for nonprofit groups, committed tax fraud, and took millions for personal use. A jury in February 2024 found that the NRA mismanaged charitable funds when it failed to stop top executives from diverting millions of dollars for lavish personal trips, no-show contracts, and other questionable expenditures. Those are problems. The jury found that the group's longtime leader, Wayne LaPierre, who had resigned the month earlier, should pay the gun rights group $4.3 million in damages for mismanagement and misspending charitable funds. Charitable funds. Can you imagine an NRA, a charity? Thanks a lot for killing people. CNN asked the NRA for comment on the DOJ investigation. Did they get it? I don't know. I guess not. Any weaponization of the Justice Department should disturb every American, a spokesman for James's office said. We stand strongly behind our successful litigation against the Trump Organization and the National Rifle Association, and will continue to stand up for New Yorkers' rights. Well, boilerplate stuff, but worth mentioning and worth keeping an eye on, and it's not the only such thing happening, nor is it the only such thing we have noted in our Instapaper compilation. Let's see if we can open this one up here from The Hill from the other day. Zach Schoenfeld and Rebecca Beach, who have put together this piece we need to update. Appeals Court, once again, probably the D.C. Court of Appeals, scraps Boasberg's contempt order against Trump officials. You remember the other day we were talking about another of the more dangerous and insane things that Trump and his DOJ were up to, including filing an ethics complaint of sorts against Judge Boasberg for the crime of essentially finding against Donald Trump. And issuing a temporary restraining order and ordering the extradition planes to turn around, the rendition planes to turn around, rather than deliver the alleged deportees from Venezuela to the maximum security CCOT prison in El Salvador under the deal with Bukele. And he wanted those planes to turn around, and they wouldn't. And he considered that to be a violation of the court's orders. And then remember all of this, in the supposedly confidential discussions among the U.S., the Judicial Conference of the United States, the administrative body run by the judges themselves that administer federal courts and set federal court policy, of which the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, is the titular head of the chair of the conference. Well, and that came up again a second time, and I think I was reaching for the connection the other day while we were talking on the fly. But Boasberg had mentioned in their confidential proceedings that he was worried about that thing that had actually happened in his courtroom. He was worried that in his court and elsewhere across the United States, thanks to the revelations of the whistleblowers telling us that newly minted Third Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Emile Bove, when he was at the DOJ briefly, was instructing people to tell courts, you're going to have to tell judges to go F themselves and ignore their court orders. Hey, this could be a problem. Hey, how dare you say there could be a problem? Your criticism is undermining the integrity of both the executive branch and the judicial. I mean, really one of the most ridiculous and possibly most dangerous propositions that the DOJ has put forward so far. Because as I said, it does stand for the proposition that it is now illegal to rule against the Trump administration. Well, at any rate, he had entered a very carefully documented and very carefully entered into contempt order against DOJ officials for defying his court orders. Now, not only does he face an ethics complaint about it, but now the appeals court has thrown out his contempt order against the Trump officials. And we'll read some of the details of what happened from the Hills report, I guess, after this break, but just to give you a sense of what happened here. It's as close as it can be in a 3-judge panel. A federal appeals court voted 2-1 last Friday to scrap a judge's probable cause finding to hold Trump administration officials in contempt for disobeying his orders. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm thinking about 10 things at once, and briefly considering going back, I wanted to go see what Steve Vladeck might have had to say at some point about the Boasberg complaint, which is long and involved and well worth your time, certainly, but a bit of a diversion. I got to first get through the fact of the, not the complaint against him, but the contempt order that he was working on with the DOJ. Now, again, just to sort of recap here, not only was there this ridiculous ethics complaint, and Vladeck does a great job, and we may already have read it, I don't remember for sure, but I have a feeling that we didn't. But we got to some other discussions of it, that probably in which he was quoted in some of these other stories. But the ethics complaint itself is ridiculous on its face, because both both on the merits, like this isn't actually at all undermining the integrity of either branch, let alone both. And two, it happened in the confidential confines of the judicial conference, and as Senator Whitehouse pointed out the other day, this is actually extraordinarily concerning. And how come Chief Justice Roberts isn't worried that the DOJ, in filing this complaint, uses as its main evidence information that should have been held in confidence, even if it had itself been problematic content, which it wasn't? The DOJ should never be using internal discussions and deliberations of the judicial conference to charge its members with bogus ethics complaints. And that, at a minimum, the Chief Justice ought to be admonishing the DOJ for attempting to do so, but apparently is currently uninterested in doing so. Well, anyway, one, the complaint is bogus. Two, the basis for making the complaint is highly questionable. And three, though, separate from the complaint issue itself is the actual contempt proceedings in Boasberg's court. And it should be noted that Boasberg, like most federal judges, responsible federal judges, is being extraordinarily careful and meticulous in documenting how they're bringing these contempt orders forward so that they are essentially beyond reproach. And yet, the result is they've been reproached. I mean, very deliberate and very careful in documenting every step of the way and double checking with people. And in fact, talking with people at the judicial conference to make sure that he was on solid ground. I think this requires a contempt finding, don't you? I mean, aren't we worried that without a contempt finding, we're just simply sanctioning the DOJ's activities here in ignoring judicial orders? How can we survive as a conference if we allow this? And then, of course, charging him for asking this question, essentially. And on top of it, appealing the contempt orders that have been so meticulously prepared. All the meticulous preparation and double checking of facts and crossing of T's and dotting of I's that say Alicia Cannon doesn't do, or various other Trump judges. And I guess you can expect Emile Beauvais to be doing from the Third Circuit bench now. All right, so The Hill reported the other day that a federal appeals court voted 2-1 on Friday to scrap a judge's, that's Boasberg's, probable cause finding. This meticulously documented probable cause finding. And that's all it is. It's not a finding of contempt. It's a question, is there a probable cause to believe that a contempt citation ought to go forward, given that we've established that I have issued an order, the DOJ has not complied with that order, and that we now have whistleblower evidence that behind the scenes, before deciding not to comply with my order, the Justice Department top brass instructed the line prosecutors to tell me to go F myself and to disobey my order. Doesn't that merit, it doesn't rise to the level of probable cause to proceed with, well, let's go find out now whether we really do think legally this was contempt of court? It's not a finding of contempt of court. It's a finding that we should go make a finding. I think we probably cleared that hurdle. But 2-1, the appeals court says, no, you didn't. Wow. So they're scrapping Judge Boasberg's probable cause finding to hold the Trump administration officials in that case in criminal contempt for disobeying his order. And what was that order? Turnaround deportation flights that are ultimately destined for El Salvador. They didn't do it, right? Those flights landed. So how is it not contempt? Well, maybe it doesn't rise to that level. Well, does it rise to the level that we should ask whether it rises to the level? Is it not a crazy question to ask if it rises to that level? On a probable cause standard, the answer is that's not a crazy question. You ordered it. They didn't do it. Now you know that he was instructing people not to do it and to tell you to go F yourself if you said you should do it. Does that merit an inquiry? An actual appeals court in this country says no. That's problematic, to say the least. So, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia ruled that the administration was entitled to an intervention because U.S. District Judge James Boasberg's efforts to punish administration officials raised immediate concerns. Well, yeah, it raises immediate concerns. The concern is the contempt of court and the direction to tell the court to go F itself, not holding them accountable for it. That's not the immediate concern. The order forces a co-equal branch, they say, to choose between capitulating to an unlawful judicial order. What's unlawful about it? No one says. And subjecting its officials to a dubious prosecution. Why is it dubious? It was meticulously documented. Well, that is according to the now infamous U.S. Circuit Judge Naomi Rao, who was in the majority by 2-1. That's the panel they drew. What can I tell you? This one, I think you're likely to see reheard en banc, because I don't think a majority of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals agrees, ever with Judge Rao, and two, I find it difficult to believe that they're going to come down on the side of, this was an unlawful order. It wasn't. First of all, it wasn't really an order for much of anything. It was an order to go ahead with an investigation into whether or not those DOJ attorneys were, in fact, in contempt of court. Nobody's lost anything here. They're just going forward with an investigation, which, after all, is the business of these courts and the DOJ. Rao was, of course, appointed circuit judge. They're both. She's a Trump appointee, but she was joined. The other judge here, they drew a panel of 2 out of the 3 judges are Trump appointees. There was Rao and Judge Gregory Katsas. Now, as it happens, there was someone else on the panel who was appointed by a normal president, President Obama, in fact. It was Cornelia Pillard was the 3rd judge, and guess what? She dissented and, in fact, complimented Boasberg for his skill and wisdom in handling the case, which has sparked impeachment threats from Trump and a barrage of public criticism from his supporters. Even when faced with what reasonably appeared to him to be foot-dragging, evasion, and outright disregard for his jurisdiction and his orders, he responded with unfailing composure, Pillard wrote. Right. He didn't throw the book at him, scream, hit him over the head with the little hammer, like I say is what they should be doing, but instead said, all right, this is supposed to be contempt of court when this stuff happens, but we're proceeding with immense caution because this is, after all, the DOJ we're talking about here. So we got to make sure all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. The DOJ says, you ought to be impeached. You need an ethics complaint against you. The president wants you impeached. Members of Congress say that. And in fact, an appeals court is going to throw out your probable cause finding in the face of all of this probable cause. Boasberg entered the national limelight for being assigned the first lawsuit when Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act in March to swiftly deport alleged Venezuelan gang members, and as it turns out, none of them were, to a notorious Salvadoran mega prison. So even on the merits of this stupid case, all of the Trump administration was in the wrong. They admitted that they were in the wrong. They fired the guy who admitted that they were in the wrong. The boss of the guy who got fired, the person who did the firing, told everybody else, if you're still here, it's your instruction from top brass here at DOJ is tell courts to go F themselves. They got a hold of that information. They defied the orders. The judge very carefully found, well, there might be probable cause to hold these people in contempt. And the response is impeach him, file an ethics complaint, reverse his decision. Well, at a hastily convened Saturday hearing that weekend, Boasberg ordered the administration to turn around any airborne planes deporting migrants under the rarely invoked statute. The order was later wiped by the Supreme Court, but the judge has accused the administration of willfully disregarding it and still sought to hold officials responsible. The Constitution, ready for this one? The Constitution, this is Boasberg, does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders. Yeah, probably. Especially by officials of a coordinate branch who have sworn an oath to uphold it, Boasberg wrote in his contempt ruling. Boasberg is an Obama appointee, they point out. The D.C. Circuit halted the contempt proceedings as it considered the administration's appeal. An appeal of what? An appeal of a probable cause finding? I guess so. It did so without explanation, in case you were wondering, right? By issuing an administrative stay, which normally lasts for only a short period of time until the court can hear from the parties, but it has been in effect since April. In that time, a Justice Department whistleblower stepped forward with allegations that Emil Bove, then the number 3 at the Justice Department, floated defying any potential court orders blocking the use of the Alien Enemies Act, saying they may need to tell the courts F you. The complaint from Erez Ruveni detailed other instances of Justice Department officials seeming to defy Boasberg's order once it was in place, including attorney Drew Ensign telling Boasberg that he was unaware whether flights would be taking off in the next 24 to 48 hours. He knows they're being removed, Ruveni said of Ensign, texting a coworker during the hearing, specifying that he knows about the flights. The coworker agreed, saying he knows there are plans for AEA removals within the next 24 hours. So, they caught him lying. It's a question if Drew gets out without a sanction, the coworker added. Right. There's probable cause for proceeding with sanctions, according to the people inside the DOJ. But nope, we're reversing it and charging the judge who found probable cause, on only probable cause. Bove, who was recently confirmed by the Senate for a judgeship on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, largely dodged questions about whether he used the expletive during his confirmation hearings. I've certainly said things encouraging litigators of the department to fight hard for valid positions that we have to take, Bove responded when asked about whether he had endorsed defying a court order. I certainly convey the importance of the upcoming operation, he added, that's an addition, about the Alien Enemies Act flights. The long delay in reaching a decision was noted by members of Congress who argued that the delay in a ruling from the appeals court helped shield inquiries into the actions of Bove, who declined to answer numerous questions about the matter while it was still before the court. The matter was pending before the 3 judges for more than 3 months. It's hard to see why an administrative stay of this length, imposed to give the court sufficient opportunity to consider the emergency motion seeking a stay pending appeals, would ever be justified. As you know, administrative stays ordinarily last for hours or days, not weeks and certainly not months. Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Richard Blumenthal wrote in a letter last week to the chief judge before going on to raise the specter of political considerations. And then Whitehouse echoed the same issues in his letters to Chief Justice Roberts in his role as chair of the Judicial Conference. Given the obvious relevance of the outcome of this contempt investigation to Mr. Bove's fitness for judicial office and the timing, the extraordinary length of the administrative stay raises alarming questions about whether the stay was imposed for the purpose of fending off honest fact-finding while this confirmation proceeding went forward. Yes, it did. It's the only obvious conclusion. Stop being coy. The underlying case over Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act is still moving forward in Boasberg's court, but its future remains unclear now that the deported migrants have been released from the Salvadoran mega prison and transferred to Venezuela in a large-scale prisoner swap. The ACLU, which represents the migrants, told Boasberg in a written update Thursday that many of the Venezuelans wish to still pursue their case to return to the United States. It's very complex, a lot of moving parts, but a lot of overlap between the moving parts. And people are playing 2 and 3 roles in this thing. But once again, it's really rather amazing how much flagrant violation of the presumption of regularity is wrapped up in all of this. So I have this rather lengthy piece from Steve Vladeck. I should check back in Instapaper and see if there's anything else about this one. I don't think there's anything direct on this, although I just have a couple other notes to myself about some other tangents that sprang to mind in all this. But do we have the time for it? Maybe. Steve Vladeck also examines this on a microscopic level, but he doesn't have anything. I didn't see anything about the appeals court overturning Boasberg's probable cause finding, but I did see something that probably also should be on the record that would help explain just how bad the ethics complaint is. here. This goes back to the end of July, though. It is the DOJ's ridiculous misconduct complaint against Chief Judge Boasberg, Chief Judge of the Federal District Court in D.C., that is. DOJ's complaint that Chief Judge Boasberg engaged in misconduct, and that's in scare quotes, would be laughably stupid if it didn't reflect such a transparently obvious and dangerous attempt to delegitimize the federal courts. I kept saying at the onset of this thing, this may be the most dangerous thing the DOJ has done yet. Like I say, it again, and I'm not kidding, stands for the proposition that it is the DOJ considers it at least illegitimate, if not illegal and unconstitutional, to just rule against the interests of President Trump, whatever they may be, personal interests or official. In this case, official, but I'll bet it's coming around to personal. If you, I guess, to borrow a phrase from Trump, if you take a look at the fact that they're now investigating Letitia James, who managed to get fraud convictions against his private activity and his business's activity, that too now warrants federal investigation because it's obviously criminal to violate President Trump's, even though he wasn't acting in his capacity as president at the time, civil rights. That is to say, the right to never be prosecuted for any of his crimes. Apparently, that's now a civil right for him. Well, all right, I better get to it because it's a lengthy discussion of how bad this thing is. And he says, I wanted to put out a quick issue to cover the misconduct complaint that the Department of Justice had filed against D.C. District Court Chief Judge Jeb Boasberg, based on comments that Boasberg apparently made at a March meeting of the Judicial Conference of the United States. He says he wanted to do it quickly, but that's impossible, both for him and for me. I'll say more about the background below, but the gravamen of the complaint is that Boasberg's comments reflect bias against the Trump administration and should subject him to censure by the Judicial Council of the D.C. Circuit. Well, that complaint is almost laughably preposterous. First, Boasberg's comments weren't public. Second, and that's White House's point. Second, his comments were apparently nothing more than relaying to the Chief Justice concerns that had been raised by his colleagues on the federal bench, like there are several of them, in D.C. Third, it turns out that those concerns were well taken. Wow. Imagine that, like factually valid concerns being expressed. And fourth, even if none of the first three things were true, and they are, the comments don't come anywhere close to crossing the line of what judges can and can't say in public, which isn't even where he said it, with respect to systemic issues facing the federal courts. Whether D.C. Circuit Chief Judge Sri Srinivasan, I always have difficulty, but that's not a hard name really, Srinivasan, gives the complaint the back of his hand, or because it's coming from DOJ. And why does that matter? Because normally there's a presumption of regularity here, even though it's disappearing. So whether he gives it the back of the hand or because it's coming from DOJ takes it at least somewhat seriously, e.g. by referring it to the D.C. Circuit Judicial Council for full consideration, there's just no question at the end of the day, this complaint is going to be dismissed under normal circumstances, I would say. That's not what we have here. But yeah, it's really rather amazing. And by the way, this is knowingly the Trump DOJ and his advisors knowingly exploiting the weakness of the judicial system here by understanding that normal judges trying to follow normal procedure and establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're right in the end, they are going to do things like this, right? This is what's at the heart of what's going on here. Boasberg issues an order, watches it defied in real time, gets whistleblower information that says that higher-ups at the DOJ are intentionally defying the orders, giving other people who report to them the order to defy those orders, and we're seeing text messages behind the scenes by other colleagues saying, that guy is totally lying to the court and we are defying court orders. You take all of that, normal people, like Donald Trump sitting in judgment of this case, God forbid, would say that's, open and shut case. Here's all the evidence you need to conclude that this is contempt of court. But instead, they go inch by inch, slowly on their way to plotting their way through the procedure. First, we'll have a probable cause hearing. And then when we find that there's probable cause, we'll go to the actual hearing for contempt of court. And we'll bring witnesses, and there'll be sworn testimony, and there'll be cross-examination, and there'll be a finding by the court with legal reasoning placed in writing to find this thing. And then all of that will be subject to the appeals process if necessary. But, to hell with all of that. This is obviously an outrageous breach of judicial, no, it isn't. But they're taking advantage of this again, and they're doing the same to Judge Srinivasan. They're going to show him this complaint. Now, he could say, look, this is obvious on its face. No. But instead, in an abundance of caution, in the hopes of reaching a fair and universally recognized, legally sound conclusion, we're going to go through the process here and weigh this stupid idea. But this was just like their claims of the election rigging. Well, we're going to entertain them all in court, or various other things, or the idea, the criminal case. Several criminal cases being brought against Trump when he was out of the presidency, taking forever because they wanted to go through every step of the process so that it would be beyond reproach. And there's just no way to get beyond these guys' reproach, because they'll reproach you for anything, even if it's made up. Back to Steve Vladeck here. The bigger issue is that the Department of Justice and the Attorney General specifically filed this nonsense and then tweeted about it in the first place. I very much doubt that Judge Boasberg is the kind of jurist who will be at all intimidated or in any way cowed by such a maneuver, but there are two other audiences for this charade. The first is other federal judges who may be less willing to speak out or to raise concerns about the Justice Department's behavior going forward, lest they too find themselves the subject of a misconduct complaint. And the second is the current administration's supporters, for whom the complaint can be pointed to as yet further evidence that the lower federal courts are out to get President Trump, since no one will still be paying attention when, not if, it gets rejected. Yet again, the executive branch is actively seeking to discredit the federal judiciary, and far too many people who ought to be speaking out against this nonsense will just quietly tisk at the Department of Justice and shake their heads. Puts me in mind of something that I saw on Blue Sky earlier today, and I know that means I'm getting in the way of my reading of this thing. Let's see. Where are we? Yes, right. Nicholas Grossman was commenting on someone else's comment here, but beginning comment being from Ryan Enos, social scientist at Harvard University, pointing out the American press and public really need to figure out how to simply dismiss Trump's pretextual claims for authoritarian attacks and then resist the attack itself, not debate the claim. We've spent months asking, but is the Ivy League really anti-Semitic? And now, but is D.C. really crime-ridden? And Nicholas commenting on that. The adamant elite refusal to call bullshit is a big part of how we got here. The prevailing cultural attitude for years is you must not, under any circumstances, treat anything as bad faith. You are obligated to find some reasonable idea and engage with that, even if you distort it to get there. And that seems relevant in some way to what Steve is recounting here. Again, the executive branch seeking to actively discredit the federal judiciary, and far too many people who ought to be speaking out against this are just tisking and shaking their heads. We just refuse to call this stuff out. Now, a quick discussion, or at least a quick bit about, before we run out of time, of DOJ's complaint. Although it includes a bunch of extraneous material, the crux of DOJ's complaint, quote unquote, which is signed only by the Attorney General's Chief of Staff, Chad Mizell, like no actual, line attorney for this, is in a paragraph on page 2. Here's the allegation. On March 11, 2025, at one of the Judicial Conference's semi-annual meetings, Judge Boasberg disregarded its history, tradition, and purpose to push a wholly unsolicited discussion about, quote, concerns that the administration would disregard rulings of federal courts, leading to a constitutional crisis by singling out a sitting president who was and remains a party to dozens of active cases. Judge Boasberg attempted to transform a routine housekeeping agenda into a forum to persuade the Chief Justice and other federal judges of this preconceived belief that the Trump administration would violate court orders. Well, there are two critical pieces of context that neither the DOJ's complaint nor the sensationalist story in the right-wing outlet The Federalist that supposedly broke this story, the episode has provided. For starters, the Judicial Conference's entire meeting is not public. The conference may sometimes have press availability at the end of the meeting, but the internal conversations and deliberations have not, historically, been a matter of public record, a point that's going to matter in a minute. So when the Attorney General of the United States tweets about improper public comments, she's not even accurately describing what happened at all, nor are the repeated references in the complaint to public statements accurate in the least, I would have to add. But of course, we run into time constraints. I know there was just so much to tie together here, but I wanted to at least refer you to what Steve Vladeck is saying, give you a taste for how outrageous the whole situation is, up to and including the fact that a 2-to-1 Trump appointee panel of the D.C. Circuit would throw out probable cause findings for contempt here. I mean, layer upon layer of cover for insane activity at the Department of Justice. No possible justification for any of it at any level, and mountains of evidence of how improper it actually is. And the finding here, and I know it's a week late that we actually began to discuss it, but the finding here by the D.C. panel is easily as egregious as anything Eileen Cannon has ever done, and we're just not focusing on it. And, you know, I know we're being distracted left and right. Occupation of Washington, D.C., a so-called summit happening in Alaska, Jeffrey Epstein, of course, but the fire hose continues. Next up, of course, though, Justice Putnam takes his turn at the fire hose, letting you know what's rising to the level of his attention as we head into the weekend. And I'll read you a little bit about that, tease you with it coming up next.
From networksradio.com.
It's not a long tease. You're about to hear the show.
You've been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, here's what we got here. Trump hated the jobs report so much. Wait until he finds about the producer price index. We heard a little bit about that yesterday. Who's left to fire? And one other bit here. Oh, I don't know. I'm probably not even going to get into it. I can't. I don't have enough time. But guess what? He's targeting DEI programs in the nation's schools and colleges. You know about that. We'll see you next week.